It's an impromptu close of play, Jonesy. You find me at Westfield London doing my Christmas shopping. You're in exactly the same position as you always are, but we're doing this today because there's been a couple of bits of news that we need to cover off. One is England have announced their side for the second test, and the second is the sad demise of England legend and Hampshire legend Robin Smith over in Australia. So let's do the happy stuff first. England have chosen Will Jacks to replace Mark Wood. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd stick it as a happy thing because for obviously for Shoaib Bashir, he's on the end of a decision which I think he would probably find quite frustrating. He's been the player in possession of that spin bowling role for the last 3 years. And he would have left for Australia thinking he is the number one, and quite rightly, the number one choice spinner. And so on the back of that, I think he would have taken a lot of communication with him to explain this choice because he's played 3 years. He hasn't played much county cricket because he's played Test cricket. And now all of a sudden it's been flipped where they've recognised they need a spinner and it's not him. But I could see Will Jacks, he's got his attributes, but for me it's how they will have explained to Shoaib Bashir the decision they've made.
And Jacob Bethel's the other one to bring into that mix. If they were going down the route of a batting spinner, let's say, Bethell was the one that also comes to mind, and they had sent him off to Canberra to play in that match. Did he just not do enough?
Well, I don't think he's quite ready to be that number one spinner. They obviously see him as a huge talent. He's captain the one day side, and so he's definitely a player that for the future. But in an Ashes Test match, which they have to win, for him to be the number one man with the ball, I'm not sure he's ready for that. I'm not sure he's got enough overs under his belt, which I'm sure we'll say about that with Will Jacks. But for Bethell, he's primarily a batter, and a part-time spinner, whereas Will Jacks is slightly different. He's in white ball cricket, he's led with bowling as well as his batting. But for me, it comes back to, I mentioned about overs under the belt. Will Jacks is in a similar position. He's only bowled 74 overs in the county season. He's taken 5 wickets. And all the spinners I've spoken to and played with, they used to love to bowl and bowl and bowl. One, learning their craft. They're learning how to beat a player with flight, subtle differences in pace of bowling. So, and England have recognised they need a spinner, right? And a frontline spinner, but they haven't quite gone for that.
What will this do to a young man like Shoaib Bashir?
Well, he's going to need to be resilient, and he's outside. He's questioning, okay, well, is that me done? What do I have to do? Because for 3 years, I've been the number one choice. They've backed me. They've publicly backed him. They've said he's got the attributes that we want and that can succeed at international cricket. They've done all the stats, his release point, everything like that. And so they've absolutely backed him. And so all of a sudden to have that pulled out from underneath him, it's going to be hard. But he is young, and so he's got future years ahead. And I'm sure that's the way that the conversation was framed in terms of, right, listen, Shoaib, this is something we've recognised for this test match. We want a spinning option, but we also want strength at number 8. And so then that flips the conversation to, do they not trust Atkinson at 8? Do they not trust their top 7? And so there's twofold to this. You've got the young man who's thought he would be the spinner, and now they've got to deal with that. When's he going to get there? And then you've also got, are we not trusting our top 7 to get enough runs? So we need bolstering at 8.
Invariably, that puts pressure, I think, on Zach Brawley at the top of the order.
Well, yeah, he's going to be one they're looking at because he's the talk in terms of the opportunities he's been given. And I read a few comments around this selection, and it did sort of go back to that: is willing to give Zach all these opportunities, but yet Shoaib potentially hasn't been offered the same. But yeah, he will need to score, because you mentioned there Jacob Bethell. Potentially he could, as a similar sort of player, left-hander, two lefties at the top. It's unique. So, they would have liked Jacob Bethell to go down to Canberra, dominate a bit more than he did, get some more runs under his belt. But I think he's a sort of player that he could walk in and do absolutely fine. We saw that in New Zealand. And so, but I don't think they're changing Zach Crawley. They've inked Zach Crawley in. At some point in this series, he will score the innings that they want him to. He will get us off to a great start. He and Duckett at the top have been an incredible opening partnership. Their stats show that, and England are backing that. They won't. For them to leave Zach Crawley out, that will call of a bit of desperation.
Do you not think that this pick of Jacks ahead of Bashir or any other bowler, not an all-rounder, but a bowler, smacks of lack of clarity or desperation anyway?
I'm not sure about the clarity bit either of those, because I think they're actually recognised. Okay, with Mark Wood with his injury, I saw the amount of strapping he had on his knee. It was monumental, and so it's not a surprise that he's out. Bringing in a spinner, I think, is learning from that first Test match. Okay, and so I think we needed that. We needed that variation, and so it's not really desperate. It's actually, it is probably a bit of clarity with actually, let's learn from it. Right, this is what we need for this second. We need a spinner. What I didn't like was Ben Stokes coming out and say, in terms of the way that they might use the spinner, he spoke about Nathan Lyon, and Nathan Lyon's had tremendous success. He's world class, and in the pink ball especially, his stats are even better than with the red. And he talked about how that they use him as an attacking threat, but they also use him to get through the overs quickly to give the new ball, but more to the fast bowlers. And for me, that's, if we're thinking of Will Jacks just getting through the overs quickly to open up more time, more overs for our fast bowlers to do it, that's a bit dangerous, because the Aussie batters aren't going to let Will Jacks settle, because they know if they can hit him out of the attack, okay, they can put pressure on him. He's hardly bowled. It's Test match cricket. It's different to white ball where you've got fields spread. If we can pressurise him to come out of the attack, where does Ben Stokes turn then? And that's a bit of my issue. Bashir, you need your spinner to do a dual role. You want them to be attacking, but you also want them to hold that end up, not to hurry up so that the fast bowlers can bowl more. So he has, Ashley Giles for us in 2005 in that series. He could do both roles. He took wickets, but also he was we could trust an end to give the bowlers rest. The Aussie batters will be looking, if we can get rid of Jacks out of the attack, we're putting more pressure on those fast bowlers who we know are fragile, who we know, yes, we've got four of them, but Ben Stokes with his injuries, Jofra with his injuries, there's a concern there. So the Australians will be looking at them thinking, actually, there's a window of opportunity with this selection.
Is there not an opportunity, or do you not think, therefore, saying to Joe Root, you're going to be the spinning batter, and then playing Josh Tongue or Matthew Potts would have been a better call?
I don't want Joe Root having to bowl 30 overs in an innings. He's got a bit of a fragile back himself. And so putting that extra pressure on Joe Root, he's already had huge amounts of pressure mounted. The fact he hasn't scored an Ashes Test match in Australia, right? And then he got out in the way he did in the first Test. That's going to build up slightly. He's an incredible character. He's so experienced that you'd probably look at it and go, he should be able to cope with the noise about his batting. So for me, putting bowling pressure on him, we just want him to bat. We want Joe Root to get that 100, get regular hundreds. And so, no, he's not the option. You want a specialist spinner that can do the role for the team.
Then the unluckiest man in English cricket is Ryan Ahmed.
But I think he's had an opportunity. I don't think Ryan Ahmed is Test match ready in a way.
In terms of, unless he plays, will it?
he's had an opportunity on wickets that offered, and he had some success. But they've looked at him over county cricket. I watched him bowl quite a lot. Leicester playing Kent. Okay, and then also I went to the England Lions match against India.
Yeah.
Okay, and what I was talking about there was the ability to tie and end up, still whilst being attacking, but not. And that's what he hasn't got for me yet. He's a tremendous talent, but throwing him into an Ashes test where he leaks runs, he hasn't got that ability to tie and end up, and that's where Bashir could do that, and that's what they're hoping Jacks can do now. So I don't see Rain Ahmed as huge unlucky because he's got a really big future. I just don't think he quite is ready for Test match purely with his bowling yet.
The interesting thing I think there is, from a batting perspective, if you look at the way that England went through from Brook down to the bowlers very quickly, Will Jack's coming in as a very attacking batsman. Batter opens the batting, also in the top three as far as white ball is concerned. Does he give anything extra as a batter? I know he is technically an extra batter, but the way he plays, invariably we can get down to Gus Atkinson at 9 quite quickly.
Yeah, but he fits in with the narrative of the style of cricket we want to play. England wants to play. He fits in with that well. And in a situation, Ben Stokes said himself, the batters that had the best success were sort of aggressive. They were positive, weren't they? And so that's where they're looking there. And so they have the massive belief that, again, talent can come through in those situations. And yes, you'll see some situations where we don't like as fans to see, but in time, Will Jacks can potentially play in innings that could turn this test match. And that would have definitely come into their consideration.
Your ex-captain, Michael Vaughan, again, saying that England need to adapt. I was listening to Ricky Ponting saying pretty much the same thing on a podcast yesterday. What he also said, Ponting was, that actually that Australian side that you played against, 2005 side, were actually very aggressive as a team. They went out and they scored big runs, scored them quickly, but they didn't label it as Bazball. Do you think the labelling of Bazball is why people give it so much attention? And actually what England is doing at the moment is no different to the Aussies did or you guys did back in 2005.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it works. It rolls off the tongue well, doesn't it? But England worked quite hard in the early times of Brendan McCullum for it not to be called Bazball. Because they sort of came out and they tried to frame it up in different languages, but it's something that in the media, it rolls off your tongue well. And it's now this term, which everyone can instantly recognize, Bazball. Okay, right. We're going to be super positive. But it's not as exciting to call it that rather than, the label of Bazball. But I agree. England are trying to play a positive style of cricket that Australia forged forward with their decisions. Gilchrist at 7, Hayden was an aggressive batter up the top. Langer was perceived as someone who, and we brought Kevin. Kevin was a counter attack. Ponting. So you're talking that. So Ponting's right that they did play an aggressive form of cricket, and I think that's what Brendan McCullum, Rob Key are trying to do with Ben Stokes with this side. It's just the fact that Bazball works so well as a label.
It does, and where the greats, going back, we spoke about this last time, you old has-beens, old-timers, or whatever that phrase was, and England don't want to adapt. And that has to, surely adaptability in circumstances that aren't going in your favour must be a key to success.
Yeah, but I'll argue that they have. They've actually, because otherwise Josh Tongue would have come in. If they were going, no, we're not changing. We've looked at it. We want 5 quicks. They'd have adapted. They've gone, okay. Second innings, it was a bit samey. Stokesy himself might have gone, I didn't have an option. I don't want Rooty to bowl that much. We need him for his batting. I just didn't have that slower bowling option. So I'd argue they have adapted.
Okay. Well, let's see. That's only going to come out in the next few days, isn't it? We need to move on to obviously sadder news. Robin Smith passing away overnight in Australia. He moved to towards a few years ago because his brother Chris Smith, who also played for Hampshire, moved to Perth, I think, a while ago. He might have been involved with the West Australian Cricket Association. But Robin, a dashing batter for Hampshire, famous for that, crouching low, that square cut. What are your memories of him?
Yeah, it's visual, isn't it? You could picture him at the crease. He wore the helmet with just the side earpieces on. He was a strong, nuggety man. He was willing to take on the best bowlers in the world. He was powerful. The cut shot was one of my only shots, to be honest. But the cut shot was something that people instantly recognised. Robin Smith, cut shot. Him absolutely lacing that ball through it. But he's Hampshire legend. So me coming through, playing for Kent, going down to Hampshire, Robin Smith talked about and held in such high regard, not only for Hampshire, but in international cricket, just through the way he played the game, his ability, and the visual skill, the Bazball shots. He could play them.
Yeah, 100%. And a nice guy as well. I mean, the first ever sort of after dinner thing that I did over in Dubai was actually with Robin Smith and Rod Marsh. I still have fond memories of that and going out for dinner with him and Rod back in the day.
I bet you there was some liquid involved.
It was definitely an interesting evening. Something. A lot of those stories I'm going to have to tell you off camera, mate, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But,
he was part of that era that they were renowned for their off-field enjoyment, play hard on and off the field. That was, that was something that the stories surround them with him and that era and that enjoyability factor of away from cricket.
And I guess sadly that sort of stepped over into problems with alcohol as he went later on in life. He gave an interview to Simon Wilde of the Times, I believe. Simon the Times or the Telegraph was one of the two. Talking very, very open about his problems and the issues that he faced. And sadly, I don't know, I'm surmising that had a part to play. But let's not put stuff out there that isn't necessarily true. But a great guy, and he'd be sadly missed.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of, someone who is so highly regarded in international and domestic cricket. It's always a sad day when you lose someone like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, mate. That's that. Impromptu podcast. It wasn't too noisy. I found a quiet spot in Westfield, but they've definitely got some tunes blowing out. So I'll go enjoy those. Make sure I buy everything that's on my list that my wife's given me for her Christmas presents, and I shall speak with you on Thursday after the first day's play.
Yeah, sounds good. Enjoy your shopping.
Yeah, can't wait. Thank you. See you, mate.
Yeah.